In the prior videos on vertical integration, we've explored where the benefits from vertical integration come from and potential costs. But really, again, we were focusing on where the firm may create synergies and where the value from corporate expansion along the value chain may come from. In this third and final video, we focus on what are some potential alternatives to vertical integration that may cause the ownership test to fail or may help the firm capture value from the vertical integration. One alternative to full integration is taper integration, and this really helps the firm to address some of the challenges of vertical integration and try to reduce the costs. At the top here we have a fully vertically integrated firm that owns all aspects of the value chain, and essentially each stage of the value chain is responsible for buying or purchasing all the outputs of the stage before it. What taper integration says is the firm may be allowed to either buy from the outside or sell to the outside when appropriate. So if we take the arrows coming in, so for example the arrow below intermediate manufacturing coming in from the outside, what this basically says is if the firm does not want to buy from its own raw material supplier, maybe the costs are getting too high or it's becoming inefficient or the quality is suffering, the firm is allowed to buy from an outside supplier in order to fulfill its needs. And what this does is again highlight to headquarters or corporate management that there's a problem in the raw materials division, because if I own a division that produces the raw material, but my own internal division does not buy the raw materials being produced, there is an issue here that needs to be addressed. Perhaps it's inefficiency or a quality problem. On the other side, we have arrows going out, and what this is basically saying is it allows the firm to sell to outside third parties if it has excess capacity. And in this case, what these two arrows are doing is basically addressing two of the challenges of vertical integration. The arrow coming in where I can buy from an outside third party rather than my own internal supplier creates that cost to be efficient, that pressure from alternative suppliers. So the firm must be efficient and control its costs and quality. The arrow out protects the firm from that issue of having different efficiency scales between the various value chain stages. So if the firm does have excess capacity in one of its value chain stages, but it needs to produce to stay efficient, it can then sell this excess output to an outside firm, provided it's not a direct competitor. So thus taper integration helps the firm address some of the dangers of vertical integration while still being vertically integrated. A different type of vertical integration or different type alternative is represented in this graph here, where what this graph shows are there are different types of supply relationships or vertical integration relationships that should be considered. And this really addresses the cost of ownership. And what it's basically saying is, does the firm need to vertically integrate, or can it obtain the better off benefits through some other alternative? Up on the upper right-hand corner, we see vertical integration where the degree of commitment is high because I'm committing a lot of resources, and the formalization is low because I own that activity. Essentially, this is where I make it myself. All these other alternatives represent opportunities to potentially get the benefits of vertical integration without owning it. So for example, if we look down the bottom, I might pursue contracts with long-term contracts with suppliers or with distributors. Or I might pursue franchises that give others the right to use my name instead of me selling it myself. I might also form partnerships with suppliers and customers or strong informal relationships that help me to manage without vertically integrating. Or I might form a joint venture where I share the responsibility with my external third party. What's basically showing here is that there are alternatives to vertical integration. The firm has to decide, can I get the benefits of vertical integration without actually vertically integrating? And if so, the ownership test fails and I should pursue one of these alternatives. It's important to note that these alternatives to vertical integration have varying characteristics, and they vary in terms of the risk sharing involved. In other words, how much risk does the firm bear, but also the incentives that work together. If we think about short-term contracts, the firm gains from having efficient prices because its suppliers or distributors know that they're on one-year contracts that could be terminated within a year, creating the pressure to make sure performance is efficient and the firm receives good service. However, there's no relationship with short-term contracts, which means if something were to come up, this exchange party is less likely to work with a firm. Long-term contracts provide us more stable relationship and a greater likelihood that the firms will, continue to work together over a longer period of time. However, it does create the chance of opportunism because now in longer-term contracts, the exchange party may try to use hold-up to try and gain more power. If I go without contracts and rely more on relationships with vendors rather than contracts, they're much less formal and more collaborative. But if something goes wrong, I do not have the legal ability to go after them for some of the dangers or some of the costs incurred. And then lastly, franchising involves me giving my licensing, my name, my brand image, and maybe some of my processes for a third party to sell my good or service. Again, there are benefits here in the sense that it's lower cost and I'm sharing the risk here, but on the other hand, I have less control. So the firm must decide in this process whether the benefits of vertical integration can be obtained or whether the risks here with going through an alternative form may require or may push the firm to vertically integrate in order to avoid some of these risks.